as we discussed at the top of the meeting, there are key areas that we're discussing as it pertains to Black health. And one of those areas is education. So we're going to hear a little bit about what's happening right now in the city of Oakland with our public schools, as well as how we got there and what is needed to make sure that we are on the path to make sure that our children are healthy and whole when it comes to their learning. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our next presenter, Chela Delgado. Hi, Chela, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, y'all. I am just gonna drop into the chat the slide deck I'm gonna use, and I'm told that it'll be added for folks. So in case folks wanna look at it later on the email. So hi, my name is Chela Maisha Delgado. I am an OUSD alum and teacher and parent. So I was born and raised here, went to Skyline, graduated in 1999. And came up in Oakland in the 90s as a mixed Black kid, so had a lot of opportunity to observe race dynamics in my own education, and then obtained to my PhD in social and cultural studies and education, and have been teaching back in the public schools as a high school teacher for the last 15 years. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about school closures and the proposed closures that the school board brought forth a few months ago, and sort of the broader context. This is an area that is dear to my heart, both because it's something I academically studied for my dissertation research, and I also directly experienced the impact of closures. I share a campus with, I teach at CCPA in East Oakland, and share a campus with Roots, the middle school that was closed a few years ago there. So I'm gonna try to keep it to my 10 minutes and talk about three main things. One, the general context of the school closures. Two, why school closures aren't the answer. And three, school closures and anti-Blackness. So jumping in, this is a slide that was presented at the OUSD board meeting on January 31st as part of the justification for the school closures. At that time, it was a list of 11 schools, I believe, slated for closure in the next academic year. So their argument at that time was essentially that we have 80+ schools in Oakland, and we have two options. One is staying the course, and the second is consolidation and deeper investments in quality. So there's been a lot of framing of the idea of too many schools in Oakland. I would argue that it's a broader problem of funding, both at the state level, but also prioritization of funding at the local level. We do outspend local districts on private contractors and top administrative salaries. Not to mention the continuation of the use of offices at 1000 Broadway, which are mostly empty because most of the staff is working at home due to COVID. I'm not saying that we don't have a money problem, we do, but school closures are not the answer. And the reason is because, according to district officials themselves, the closures would save between $4 and $14 million. That is possibly 2% of OUSD's $700 million budget. So we're talking about the possibility of displacing students and families for 2% of the overall budget. And that's in a broader context of the lower and lower and lower enrollment of Black students in OUSD. So back in 1996, when I was going to Bret Harte Middle School, Black students were half of the district, 52%. Right, that enrollment continued to drop. So by 2005, we're seeing 40%. And today, in 2022, Black students are about 21% of OUSD enrollment. So the district has told us, we're being pressured by the state and the county. So Karen Monroe is the Alameda County supervisor. FCMAT, which is a financial state-appointed organization that have been telling us we need to get our financial house in order. And they have certainly told us that, but they have not told us that we had to do that by closing schools or majority Black schools. They're telling us we have to balance our budget. Other people are arguing, well, these schools are of such low quality, they are failing Black students. I would offer that what we actually need to do is invest in those schools. And then the third point here is that there is a financial crisis, and I think that is accurate, but that is the justification that's been given for every single time there's been a school closure in the last 20 years, and we have yet to see that money. Further, the school board passed this reparations for Black students resolution last year, in which it agreed that before any school closures could take place, we needed an equity impact analysis of any proposed closures, mergers, or consolidations, and that has not happened. So that's a little bit of the context. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about why school closures aren't the answer. So one, there's the idea that we have to do it for students, right? There hasn't been a whole lot of research on this, largely because of the way funding and research goes. A lot of it comes from people who are part of the privatization of education movement, and so they don't want to look at school closures. But there was a study done in 2017 that found that in the majority of cases of school closures, students did not, miraculously end up attending better performing schools. They generally were displaced to schools that were similarly low performing. So if what we're concerned about is students having high quality education, school closures is not the answer. The second thing we often hear is closing schools will save the district money. So I already talked about this a little bit, but part of the reality here is this graphic shows from 2000 to 2018, you can see on the left, that bar is enrollment in OUSD district schools. On the right is enrollment in charter schools in Oakland, right? And so you can see that generally there's a pretty proportional relationship. As we have had lower enrollment in district schools, we've had increased enrollment in charter schools. And the way funding in schools goes is that most schools are funded primarily through what's called ADA. So we get a certain amount of money for every day every student attends. So when those students don't attend, then we lose that money. And so you can see here, the stars on this map are schools on the possible closure list that was initially created. Those orange dots are existing charter schools. So for the vast majority of these schools that are slated for closure, there are charter schools much closer to them than district schools. So, if a parent is facing this, this sad situation of their school closing, are you going to choose to trek more and more blocks to the closest OUSD school, or are you going to go to the charter school down the street? So generally what we have found is when schools close, we don't retain those students in the district. They frequently leave. And finally, this is just from an ad hoc committee I was part of after the strike in 2019. We spent months studying with district officials the issue of school closures, and district officials admitted to us that they did not have any information or proof that money had been saved by prior school closures. And in fact, a fact-finding report found that any potential savings would likely be offset by implementation costs and a loss of enrollment primarily to charter schools. So that's the money piece, right? Like, yes, money is a problem. I don't believe, and there is no evidence to show that closing schools will actually save us money. The third thing we often hear is, well, these schools are underutilized, they're under-enrolled, right? And particularly as someone who has studied education, this one really kills me. Anyone who has studied education know that small schools and small classes are actually of huge benefit to students. So when we say that we are, that a school is under-enrolled, to me, that actually, could be looked at as potential to do really strong work with those students. And unfortunately, we're not looking at it as a potential asset. This is an image of Parker Elementary, the elementary that is on the list for closure next year still. A couple colleagues of mine went to their Black History Month assembly on Friday and said it was really beautiful, and it made them especially sad that Parker is on the list for closure. And then finally, closures really do have a huge impact. So we have seen nationally that they tend to really disrupt school communities. And this is part of a broader context, of driving down sort of the public perception of public education, and expanding privatization in cities. So this is a graphic that was created by the Journey for Justice Alliance, a coalition of community organizations on the East Coast that's primarily Black-led. And they've been doing this work for years when they looked at the issue of school closures in Philadelphia and Chicago, and other parts of the East Coast. The Schott Foundation, which is also an organization that studies this, created this graphic in which they argued that really the issue is underfunding, then schools sort of struggle and then get closed, and closure and transfer is what happens to students. So finally, just to make more explicit the context around anti-Blackness, so nationally, we saw a lot of school closures on the East Coast and in the Midwest throughout the 2000s. The majority of these schools impacted Black and Brown students, and particularly Black students. So you can see in Chicago, 87% of the students impacted by closure were Black, in Philadelphia, 81%, and in New York City, 53%. Here in Oakland, we've seen very similar things. These are the 16 schools, majority Black schools that have been closed in our city since 2004. And these were the percentages of African-American students at these schools at the time of closure. So you can see most of them are well over 50% Black. This is the list of schools that were slated for closure when the school board initially put it out. And again, sadly, we have very few majority Black schools left in our city, but this list has a lot of them. So the majority of the schools on the closure list were over 48% Black. So that's 8 out of the 12 schools. And Brianna Johnson put together this amazing graphic in which she looked at this is a list of all of the school sites that were closed, that have been closed since 2004. And you can see here, this dotted line is the district average enrollment of African-American students. So the district average at that time, throughout that time span, was 33% Black. And so you can see here, the majority of these schools served well over the district average, right? If we take one example and look at Santa Fe, this orange bar right here, it was close to 75% Black students. After being closed and then reopened as charter schools or new public schools, now this same orange bar serves fewer than 25% Black students. Right. And even though the district average overall has gone down, it's now 24% instead of 33%. You can see that these school sites serve significantly fewer Black students than they did before they were closed. And here's the two charts together. So folks who are part of the Reparations for Black Students Coalition, parent leaders, student leaders, community leaders have all been arguing that the school closures are a direct attack on our Black students. And folks have been taking significant action. So hopefully you've been seeing that there have been marches, there's been protests. There was the hunger strike convocation at Westlake Middle School. These are students at Brookfield Elementary School. These are actions that took place at Manzanita Seed and Carl Monk. This was our citywide march. This is Kampala, one of our OEA leaders, here in the front, along with Jessica Black from BOP and Clarissa Duthard from Parent Voices Oakland. At Oakland Tech organized a student-led walkout in which the students themselves were really able to identify these issues as well, talking about how it wasn't going to save us much money in the budget, and it was going to have a hugely negative impact on Black and Brown youth. And then this is one of the actions our union is taking, is that there was this agreement that we would have this equity impact analysis for any closures or mergers or consolidations as part of the agreement that came out of our strike in 2019. And so that was violated. And so we have filed a lawsuit. And in a matter of weeks, a complaint will be issued against OUSD and our case will come before an administrative law judge. So I know that was a lot, but I only had 10 minutes. So again, folks can access this in the chat, but if you're interested, upcoming actions against the closures, there's going to be a march next Saturday, March 5th from 1 to 2:30. And these are all organizations or folks who are organizing, who you can contact or follow on social media. So thank you. That's it from me. And then I guess if folks have questions, we can do that. Thanks for letting me share.
And thanks for sharing, Chela. This was really critical information. We are hearing a lot of different stories about what's actual and factual through the press and through different, even different organizations that are saying they represent children. So thank you for sharing this particular perspective. I think it's really important for people to hear.